Hello and welcome back to the podcast. It is always up to speed with Formula One. It is Thursday night or Friday afternoon if you're in Melbourne, Australia, as is our guest, Stewart Bell. Mark and Mark here, welcome you back to the show at the end of what's been a very, very busy week. Not so much in Formula One, but welcome to one and all on the podcast and to all of you watching on YouTube. Mark Daly, Mark Hamilton, as I mentioned, our special guest tonight, Stewart Bell. You might remember Stewart, who joined us earlier in the season. He is an FIA-accredited Formula One journalist. He's the producer of The Inside Line. He's written for such websites and publications as news.com.au, at 7 Sport, at Motorsport, at GP Racing Online, and much, much more. Stuart, welcome back. How are you?
Thanks very much, guys. Really pleasure to be here. I'm well. You know, in Melbourne, Australia, as you said, we're in our 6th lockdown here, but that's okay. I think it's probably our toughest lockdown to date. We're in our 2nd week of it. Could be extended, and next week we'll see our 200th day overall in lockdown, not consecutively, obviously, but there's 5 reasons to leave, you know, including going for food and exercise. But we're used to it, and that's the COVID normal as it is in Melbourne. And yeah, doing well, working from home, and enjoying the season so far.
Well, it's been a very, very enjoyable season thus far, like you said. And before we get into it and talk about some of the highs and the lows and a lot of the controversy that we've seen through the opening dozen races, I've almost lost count how many there's been. But first of all, obviously, as you mentioned, you're in the 6th lockdown in Melbourne and Australia. Things have been a little bit different in other parts of the world. So not so long ago, we found out, we heard the bad news that the rescheduled Australian Grand Prix, that is now completely washed off the schedule for this year. And well, just maybe if you could just bring us up to date on that a little bit, and not just what brought that about, but also what might happen going into 2022.
Well, I mean, I think from our perspective, it was inevitable that the Australian Grand Prix was going to be cancelled. Certainly, we had a number of lockdowns through last year, a long lockdown through 2020 and through into this year. But the current lockdown and the lockdown before it really put paid to the Australian Grand Prix, simply because we're pursuing an elimination strategy. So any cases. 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, our current lockdown was put in place with just 8 cases, daily. So really, there's I wouldn't say it's a paranoia, but it's certainly a concern whenever there's cases, and just the chance of any sort of event being run here is very sort of unlikely. And to bring 2,000 people into Australia for Formula One, which is what the paddock is. It's just not realistic, and certainly they're not going to be put into hotel quarantine, which is what any international traveller has to do to get into Australia. 2 full weeks of hotel quarantine, which is just not possible for the Formula One paddock. In terms of 2022, I spoke with Australian Grand Prix Corporation CEO Andrew Westacott a month ago, and they're still looking for early 2020. They would like to have March, but I still think that's quite realistic, and it's likely that will be delayed potentially back into November again, to ensure that the event can go ahead. I mean, it's 2 years here without an event. That makes it very difficult on the corporation because there's 50 full-time people there. They run both Formula One and the MotoGP event at Phillip Island. So they need to have an event, but they need a realistic event to happen to start working on it. So, as I said, it's realistic. We all knew that it was going to be delayed, and then that it would be eventually cancelled. But I'm pretty confident that if they give it a realistic slot in 2022, that will go ahead. That would likely be November, even though they are saying March at this stage.
What was learned from the tennis? Because obviously the Australian Open is a real highlight on the professional tennis tour, and I know that there was a lot of I don't know, I don't want to go as far as saying controversy, but there was definitely a lot of concern before that started, and there were some test positive cases and things like that. Did the tennis factor at all into the decision to reschedule the Grand Prix, or was that just a separate thing, and the Grand Prix was just a victim of subsequent circumstances?
Well, I think F1 certainly dodged a bullet after it was controversial, the Australian Open. There was a lot of media coverage, a lot of outcry from people who, bringing 1,000 people in for the Australian Open, 2,000 people in for the Grand Prix. It's a PR nightmare when you've got Australians overseas who can't come home. We've got locked borders, and you need to. There's it's difficult to bring people in. So people are outraged to have well-paid athletes coming into the country. So every day during the Australian Open there was negative media coverage. People were upset, and even when people could go to the Open, there was still a curfew. So people had to leave at I think 9 p.m. even before matches had finished. So it was just really awkwardly done. And certainly in terms of the Grand Prix, they weren't going to work with a bubble. As soon as the government said that the Australian Open couldn't go into a bubble, as Formula One events have done in Europe, it cast the die for the Grand Prix. And then there's just no way that, as I said, that Formula One would go into a 2-week hotel quarantine. So the decision, as I said, the die was set, and the Grand Prix, from then on, that's really all they could do, even though the Grand Prix Corporation were continuously negotiating to have a bubble. But you've set the precedent with the Open.
Yeah, certainly. Mark, I think you wanted to jump in and say something here as well, but it really is interesting because we just finished up the Olympics in Tokyo, and that seems to have been a similar kind of a discussion and very similar feelings about that. But I'm really disappointed, obviously, for many reasons, that the Australian Open, or sorry, the Australian Grand Prix didn't go ahead as planned this year, because I was really quite excited. As much as we've become used to seeing it as the traditional season opener, as it has been for a large number of years, I was actually really excited to see it get that late season slot, and I can't help feeling a bit of quite a bit of disappointment right now when we see this, what continues to be, and hopefully promises to be, an epic battle between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. That I can't help but feeling that there was a real opportunity to have something very special happen on the streets of Melbourne later on this year. But alas, it's not to be. And hopefully that doesn't take away from the title battle at all. But yeah, I can't help but feel that there was something special that's maybe slipped through our fingers.
One of the things that occurred to me over the last couple of days, and we've been building up some awareness that you were coming on the show, and I think a lot of people that listen to our podcast, obviously, we're familiar with you from your last appearance and from your own personal work, but for a lot of our listeners, they're so new to the sport of Formula One that a lot of them have never experienced an Australian Grand Prix. And one of the things they keep asking us is talk about, they've seen on TV, they've seen the photos, but they've never experienced it live on demand in real time. And one of the questions that somebody had asked me earlier today was, if you can ask Stewart, get him to describe or compare the Australian Grand Prix against something that we know. What are the highlights? What makes it so special? And obviously, we know when we do land back in Melbourne, the track's going to be a little bit different for all the reasons that we've talked about in the past. But maybe speak to some of the highlights and some of the things that make the Grand Prix, and just for those listeners that haven't yet the opportunity.
Sure. Look, I mean, Albert Park is 2 kilometres from the city centre. I'm right in the city centre now. It is so easy to get to Albert Park from the city. It's a tram ride. There's free trams that go from the city centre into Albert Park, and really, it is one of the most beautiful, parts of Melbourne to host a race. And Melbourne is known for its fantastic food and wine, and it's a gastronomic centre. So we're known and as a coffee, center of the world. So, if you can imagine people in the morning, just everyone's got their coffees going into this park. It's summertime, so the weather is fantastic generally. Sunshine, blue skies, and there's a real buzz about it because as it for the most part has been the season opener. There's a real freshness about what's going to happen. We've seen, what's been happening in testing. It's our first glance at all the new cars, new teams, new driver pairings. And the Grand Prix paddock itself is very, easy to, everyone's all hanging out, just, talking and chatting after testing. But for the fans, it's an easy place to get around. It's you can walk most of the track with just a general admission ticket and see all the different corners. Turn 6, for example, is fantastic. General admission corner and the end of sector 1, and just they're absolutely on it there. And but as I said, I mean, Melbourne certainly in recent years has sort of pared down in terms of the funding that's gone into it, but there's still they still try to make it a reflection of Melbourne. So there's lots of sort of areas in which you can get Melbourne food trucks, Melbourne style food. There's lots of music on, and there's lots of sort of exhibitions and demonstrations. So it's a lively event. It's not just the racing. I think there's a lot of stuff going on off track. I'm really excited for the changes. I've seen that the Grand Prix guys have taken me around to see all the changes. So it really looks exciting, and they haven't lost the character of what was previously there. But as I said, it's all about the lifestyle, beautiful warm weather, blue skies, plenty of good coffee, and then when the weather heats up, everyone's having a beer or a wine and relaxing, watching racing, and it's a perfect place to be.
Well, if there ever was a pitch to make anybody want to go and watch the Australian Grand Prix, I think that was it, Stuart. Well done. I just wanted to ask you, you touched on it very nicely there, the changes that they're making to the track itself. And Melbourne is not unusual in this regard, because we've seen some modifications that we'll see shortly in September at Zandvoort with the new bank corner, and the first time we'll see a Dutch Grand Prix since the mid 1980s. But we've seen some changes. So we've seen the track revert back to its original state of Barcelona. They've talked about making changes at some of the other circuits, like I believe Yas Marina is one of them. But how did you? What was your I guess your opinion on the changes that they've made to the track so far? How do you think it will impact the racing at the Australian Grand Prix?
Well, look, I mean, obviously we haven't seen any racing on it, and I loved the track as it was. That's where I fell in love with the sport. So, at the first race there, it was incredible. So, as a purist, I didn't really want changes to happen to it, to be honest with you. But I mean, if you look at the stats, I think it's 18 passes over the last 3 events at Albert Park, and I think that's the second lowest compared to Monaco, which I think had 11, not including this year. So you've got to focus on improving the racing, and obviously Formula One's doing that with its new era cars next year. But if you look at the back straight, I think what they've done is they've tried to increase the amount of contestable corners, and they've tried to improve. That if someone makes a mistake, it's punished. So they want to get people, drivers alongside, so they can go, wheel to wheel. And the long back straight, the extended back straight will be, I think, it'll be the fastest part of the track rather than the main pit straight. So they'll get up to 330 kilometers an hour. They're going to add a DRS zone. They're pushing Pirelli to bring the softest compounds there, so the same as Monaco. And, they've just done it. I think they've widened, I think, most of the corners. Turn 6 they've basically cut off the apex, so it's 70 kilometers faster there. And they've made what was turn 13, I think, 90-degree corner, which is important to take after that long sort of the end of the back straight after that quick chicane at turn 11 and 12. And I think, just as I said, they've done it for the right reasons. They haven't dramatically made changes. The back straight is longer to try and get people side by side and a pass into that quick chicane. But I think generally they've made, they've done it for the right reasons, and they've made some good changes without ruining the character of it. And for off track, they've also reclaimed some of the land that was used for that chicane, so that there's cycling, there's walking, it's more green space for those who use it, and they've done it in line with the vision for Albert Park's, the idea of what the best part of what Albert Park can be. So, yeah, I think generally be positive, but we'll have to wait until 22 to see if it's effective, and they're going to resurface the entire track at the end of the year. So we'll have to wait, but everything looks promising from what I can see.
Well, that's great, and it sounds like they're really making use of all this extra time to do something, really try and improve the track in all aspects, not just the surface, but the character of it as well. So, of course, like you say, the proof will be in the racing next year. And as Mark pointed off the top of the show, I can't believe we've gone so long without an Australian Grand Prix. It almost seems unnatural. Anyways, guys, we're just going to take a very quick break here. We'll be back very shortly to continue our conversation here on the Scuderia F1 Pit Wall with Stewart Bell, who is our special guest tonight. So please don't go away. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, well, welcome back to the show. Again, it's Mark and Mark, joined by Stewart Bell at Stewart Bell F1 on Twitter, and that's the best way to follow him and follow his work. And Stewart, thank you so much for giving us the update on the track itself. Now, you said that like Melbourne and the Grand Prix there was where you fell in love with the sport, but did you ever get a chance to attend an Australian Grand Prix when it was hosted in Adelaide back in the day?
No, sadly I didn't. I've worked in V8 supercars previously. I did a year of PR working with the Holden racing team, and that was in 2013. And that we went to Adelaide for the Clipsal 500, and they had Jean-Eric Verne there in the Ferrari. I think it was the SF90, the 2009 car. So I haven't been there for a Grand Prix, but to go to the Adelaide track is just, you can feel the ghost of the past there when you're there. And when that Ferrari Formula One car was there, oh my God, it was just, it was awesome.
Amazing. Yeah,
it was absolutely amazing. And so, yeah, I wish that I had, but that was the closest I could get. And it was just, it lived up to its, because, and also Adelaide completely embraces the events. It's like a big country town, so they really get behind their events. So I can imagine what it would have been like. Just spectacular.
Stewart, in this, sorry, this is something I have to ask, because all of our listeners are very, very curious about how deeply embedded motorsports culture is in Australia, whether it's MotoGP, and you reference the fact that MotoGP has a hugely successful event on Phillip Island, whether it's the fact that Champ Car successfully ran on the Gold Coast back in the day, whether it was Mick Doohan being a champion, whether it was Casey Stoner being a champion in MotoGP, and now Daniel Ricciardo. And you also spoke to the V8 Supercar Series. What is it about Australia that creates this motorsports culture, or this appetite for motorsport? And you spoke to Adelaide as well, and we had a great listener a few weeks ago that had attended the race back in the day and was feeding us photos, and the same thing that you were speaking to was talking about the legacy of that event in that city, even 25 years later, that people still talk about it, and it's still part of the societal fabric of that community, that it was so big. But maybe speak to, or maybe just address the ability of Australia, despite its relatively small population when you compare it to something like the United States or the UK or France, how it's embraced and cultivated such a tremendous motorsports community.
I mean, I think, Australia has a very can-do attitude. Australians we like to get, roll our sleeves up and get into it and try different things and get involved. And I think motorsport and cars are a very big part of our heritage. We have good public transport here, but people do like to drive. We do like the driving experience, and we've got a long history in motorsport and in racing and in competition. Whether it's the Olympic Games, which we did pretty well in, I think we're sports mad generally. I mean, Melbourne especially is sports mad, but we love competition and motorsport. It's a niche sport here in Australia. Our biggest sport is football, the Australian Rules Football League. We'd also like rugby, cricket, and sports like that. They're the major interests here. But Formula One and supercars are certainly, they hit the back pages of all the major newspapers here. And we'd like to get behind our own. We've obviously had Sir Jack Brabham and Alan Jones, world champions, and then Mark Webber was obviously very, very popular here. And No Nonsense, a very no nonsense character, a lovely guy, but no nonsense. And Daniel Ricciardo is the same. And we do like people who are just get on with it, no nonsense people. And as I said, that spirit of competition and no nonsense races, that really appeals to people here.
Stewart, there was two things that you said just now that really resonated with me about the track at Adelaide and the ghost of the past, especially because without even really going back and thinking hard, there's two moments that really stand out for me in my mind. And the first of them was Nigel Mansell and that epic puncture and tire explosion that he had when battling and ultimately losing the World Championship. in 1986. And then a second one was obviously a lot more serious, was Mika Häkkinen's accident there in, what was that, 1995 or 1996, which I think sometimes goes a little bit more unnoticed because it was right at the end of the year, and Mika spent a couple of months in hospital there, I believe, while he was recovering. So, yeah, I mean, especially a track that has a lot of memories to it. But Stewart, now talking about a track that has current memories, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this, because we have gained a substantial amount of new members to this community over the past number of months, and it's we've become the unofficial home of what we like to call Generation DTS, or Gen DTS. Now, I wanted to ask you, after I went back and watched season 3, which Mark and I binged, I think, as quick as humanly possible when it dropped before the start of the season. Now, in the very first episode that deals with the Australian Grand Prix, was that a certain Stewart Bell I saw scurrying for a seat at the press conference?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, I thought that was quite funny because, well, it wasn't funny, I mean, what you were doing, but I thought it was quite interesting because I think we'd only spoken a couple of days previously, and then I saw this somewhat, quite a familiar face diving for a seat there. But yeah, I mean, how has been the reception to that Netflix series in Australia? I mean, it's been extraordinarily popular here in North America. It's quite astounding.
I think it's the same here. You know, everyone watches Netflix, and you know, the Drive to Survive series really has shown. I mean, when you watch the telecast, you get an understanding of the excitement and the vibrancy of Formula One. But Drive to Survive certainly shows what it's like being part of the sport, and the behind the scenes stories of the drivers pushing with everything they've got to have their chance. The frustration and I think the aggression. You know, there's certain things that you just cannot understand not being within a team, even as a journalist. You know, having worked within teams, you know, there's an aggression between drivers who are rivals. There's an aggression. There's a frustration. There's the emotion of being in Formula One and being in elite competition. And I think that's what Drive to Survive really has picked up on is, you know, they are playing for big money. They're playing for big glory, and everyone feels it. You know, everyone feels that pressure. It is a pressure cooker environment, and it certainly has captured that. And the story, I think they've really picked the storylines very well in terms of, you know, the major stories happening throughout the season. So that gives people an insight into it. But I think people really just want to see how, you know, how it ticks and feel that emotion that is so well, beautifully brought to the surface by the Netflix team.
You know, as a journalist myself, and more on the professional soccer side, and also covering some of the national team games here in Vancouver, it really is quite interesting. It struck me when I first started doing that and going behind the scenes, not just in the press box or down on the sidelines, but sometimes going to the dressing rooms or walking around in the bowels of the stadium, and some of the things that you see and some of the things that you hear, and sometimes you tread that sort of fine line. You know, is that offside? Is that going too far? You know, reporting this, you know, and you know, I thought that's why I found it so riveting, because, you know, Formula One has always been a passion of mine, and to sort of get a similar kind of look that I was used to a certain degree covering Major League Soccer here in Vancouver, I thought was just wonderful. And like you say, they've picked the stories, and the production, everything's been really, really great. But Mark is dying to, you know, for me to start talking about the season at hand. We've got a break coming up in about 6 or 7 minutes. So we have had such an incredible start through the first 10 or 11 races now of the season. Mark, I know you usually have a bunch of really good questions or things that you want to talk about. So why don't you pick it up from here?
I completely agree with your summary. I think this is the championship that Formula One really needed. And the whole conversation about Generation DTS is such a valid one. And a couple of years ago, we were having a conversation with Tim Haraney, who's the on-air analyst for TSN up here in Canada. And we're talking about how exciting it was that Formula One has this entirely new fan base, or they're activating an old fan base. And it was principally driven by the fact that with Liberty, they've really embraced social media, and they're really hitting at a new audience. And with Drive to Survive, they're tapping into an audience that in many cases may have been compartmentalized because of the COVID dynamic. But whatever the case, they've been able to tap in and cultivate and nurture this new fan base. And the comment that Tim made to me a couple of years ago that really resonated was, hey, look, They're lucky they're here. They've done some really great work. Now they have to make sure they keep them. And his point being that if we saw another 3 or 4 or 5 years of a single team and a single driver dominating the championship, that's ultimately not good for anybody. And I think what we've seen this year is perhaps more than anything what Formula One wants. And we hear all the conspiracy theories about this and that, but I think at the end of the day, all Liberty wants and all Formula One wants is a competitive championship that goes right down to the wire, regardless of the outcome. And it feels, and I know we're only halfway through the championship, but it feels like it's shaping up to go that way. From your perspective, I know there's still a half of a calendar left. Do you feel like this is something that could go right down to the wire, that we could be watching an all-time classic?
No doubt. I mean, it's absolutely a vintage year. There's no doubt about that. I mean, with domination in Formula One, we've seen it obviously through the years, right from the outset, from Fangio and Schumacher and obviously Mercedes with 7 straight title doubles now. And yes, it is getting very. I mean, we're seeing Lewis Hamilton at the absolute peak of his abilities. I mean, I think that's an impressive thing to watch. But you're right. What we want to see is competition right at the front, and to have 2 different teams, 2 preeminent drivers at the absolute peak of their abilities. Max Verstappen, razor sharp, but dialed back from his more sort of erratic self when he first joined Red Bull. He took a few years to work the edges off, but I think it's incredible. I mean, we've seen Lewis with 4 wins, Max with 5. We've seen Sergio Perez take his maiden win for Red Bull, his second overall. Ocon in Hungary, but that fight at the front between Lewis and Max is what we've been hoping for many years, and it's thrilling. We don't know which way it's going to go. I mean, I think the difficult thing is Mercedes have all but switched off their development. Red Bull will continue to develop their car, so whether it will swing back towards Red Bull and Mercedes will have to really get far more aggressive on pace. We'll have to on strategy. We'll have to see, but there's no doubt about it. It's a fantastic season. It's a shot in the arm for F1's fan base, and great for all of us, long-time fans to see, 2 of who will be considered 2 of the sport's greats to be duking it out up front.
Yeah, absolutely. You raised such a great point, because Max really has, like you say, taken the edges off, because I'm guessing we're going back to now, was it 2018 when he had that shunt in FP3 in Monaco, and he started the race at the back of the grid, and then he shows up 2 weeks later in Montreal without his entourage. And I think was that real milestone moment. I think that was a real coming of age moment for Max Verstappen, because I mean, we have to remember, I mean, he's still a very young man, and we've basically watched him grow up and mature before our eyes. And I think that was, well, of course, there's a lot to be written in that story before we can go back and really reflect on his career. But I think this, where he is right now, you can really say that was that make or break moment that he really was able to go in the direction that everybody wanted, because it was pretty obvious before then that he had the pace, he had the talent, and the question was, well, obviously he needs the car, but can also, does he have the stuff in between the ears, the mentality and the personality to be able to do it properly, or be able to live up to the expectations. And I think by and large he has, and it's really making it exciting. And like you say, it is really turning out to be an epic battle between these 2, because I think it's obviously very different between the battle that Lewis had with Nico Rosberg for those couple of years when they were teammates. It was the inter-team thing, and that was juicy because there was this real toxic relationship between the pair of them. And then I think there was a lot of hope that the Sebastian Vettel era at Ferrari would have delivered more. And I think that we saw as close and as good as that was going to get at least in the first half of 2018. And sadly, that kind of petered out. And this is equaled up or lived up to that so far and gone beyond it. What Max has to do now is be able to come back from the second half of the season and keep going and progressing, whereas Sebastian and Ferrari, they fell off in the latter half of that season in 2018.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's, Red Bull would not have gone into the summer break thinking that they were going to be on the back foot in the drivers and the constructors. I mean, Max had a huge advantage. I think it was 32 points after Austria, and then just that crash coming together at Silverstone, and then Hungary. Amazing that Bottas just speared into the back of Norris, and then effectively knocked both Red Bulls out in terms of position. And 2 points for Red Bull in the last 2 races really is not where they would expect it to be. So I think. And it was certainly their pace in Hungary was not indicative of what Red Bull can be. So I think coming back to Belgium, they'll want to be on the front foot and putting the hammer down and showing Mercedes, hey, we've got the car and the driver to do this. But it's all to play for sure.
Stewart, one question.
Sorry.
One of the things that's really consumed so much of our bandwidth over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks has been the way that from a leadership perspective, kind of a leadership level down, when we talk about the Red Bull team, if it's Christian Horner, if it's Helmut Marko, their responses, especially in the media, to some of the on-track incidents. So whether it was the contact in Silverstone or some of the other things that have happened, so much of the F1 ecosystem over the course of the last 4, 5, 6 weeks has been consumed with the debate about, is Christian Horner on side? Is Helmut Marko on side? Does Red Bull have a case? Or are they simply taking F1 to a place it doesn't need to be from a negativity perspective in terms of battling with the FIA, battling with Liberty, outwardly accusing Lewis of being a dangerous driver, making inflammatory comments in the media? So much of what we've been talking about over the last 4, 5, or 6 weeks hasn't necessarily been what's happening on the track, but rather processing and digesting and talking about what's happening off the track, whether it's the protest, whether it's a Horner comment, whether it's a Marko comment, whether it's Mercedes defense. Is this something that you've paid a close attention to? Is this something that you're a little bit more dismissive? Because from our perspective, Mark and I sit here and we look back and we know obviously F1 is a really competitive environment and every point matters. And if there's contact on track, you want to make sure that your case is heard and understood. But our perspective seems to be that over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, maybe Red Bull has gone in a direction that we haven't necessarily seen before in terms of their ultra high level of litigation about on-track incidents, some of the inflammatory comments, potentially inflammatory comments that have been made through the media. What's your perspective on the way that the leadership of Red Bull have conducted themselves over the course of the last 4 or 5 weeks?
I mean, I think it's not just Red Bull. I think every team are going to be political animals. Formula One, it's multi-millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. There's a cost cap now, $145 million US that you're allowed to spend, with lots of exceptions to that. But this is Formula One. It's an elite sport. It will be fought on track, off track, war of words on the media. Not only does that fuel coverage for the sport, but it also, increases the interest, in the press and what's going on. I mean, Formula One is a circus, and I don't necessarily agree that Red Bull have gone too far. Yes, they say what they think, whether it's right or not, that's up for debate. I mean, they were very critical of Renault when, in the hybrid era, leading to their split and then, awkward, returning together. But that's Formula One. And as I said, they're playing for big money, big glory, and they will fight their corner in the courtroom, in the paddock, in the media. And that's one of the things I love about it. And I don't want them to dial it down, because then, it's great for the media because we can talk about it and harness that narrative, but and explain it, give perspective to it. But I think I wouldn't want it any other way, because that is also, as we've talked about in Drive to Survive, that is the aggression, that is the level of commitment of everyone, not only the mechanics, the management. Anyone in the sport is completely invested, and so many people are involved because they've loved it since they've been a kid. The drivers, they're all completely focused. A lot of them have studied since they were 4 years old, so they are fully invested. So I understand, there's, for example, when there used to be a war of words between Bernie Ecclestone and Ron Walker, the then promoter for the Australian Grand Prix, and it was like, Bernie would say, look, if you don't want to pay the right price, we'll take it away from Australia. And that really did a lot of damage in the Australian press, because people were up in arms, because they were like, if Bernie wants more money, he's a billionaire. Well, the Grand Prix can go and, go take a hike. But, it's at the end of the day, it created news for Australia. It created news in the papers here. Whether or not it was good for it, well, probably wasn't good for it. But I think in terms of the general press, sporting press, I think it's all fair in love and war, to be honest with you, as long as it's not over the line.
You made two really great points there. One is the cost cap has obviously introduced entirely new pressures to a team. If you make contact on the track and you don't believe you're at fault, but it's going to cost you $1.5 million to get a new car and track, or to rebuild that car, that has a significant impact on the way you can operate your team. And the other point too, and this is something we're obviously guilty of, this kind of off the track dialogue obviously fuels conversation, and it fuels consumption, and it creates tweets, and it creates Twitter stories, and it gives us something to talk about. And as much as ultimately we talk about wanting to focus on the track action, probably nothing draws more ears to the podcast than that type of conversation. So you're absolutely right in the sense that, one, there's a bigger cost to these teams now that there's a cost cap, because there's additional financial pressures that they've never faced before. So, hey, maybe some contact on the track in the past, hey, that's an inconvenience. Now it's a significant impact to their ability to operate the team. But secondly, this type of narrative creates conversation, which attracts people to the sport and creates buzz and keeps people talking between Grand Prix weekend.
Absolutely. And it's only the top teams really that we're hearing from on this, because they were spending, $300-400 million a year. So it's the pressure is on them to come down, and that's very painful because they've got huge workforces, huge costs to deal with, and so they'll have to start building it. Well, I'm sure they have already built it into their budgets, because otherwise they're not going to be able to get under the cap. So for the other teams, though, for your mid-grid teams and lower grid teams, they're struggling to get up to the cap. So it's not going to be an issue for them. But so all this talk about insurance, potentially insurance, or one team being responsible for one other team's damage or whatnot, I think it's all just pressure to try and force up that cap for the top teams to try and recoup, and ease some of the pressure. But it's a challenge for those top teams. They've had to do that for a long time. And with F1's new era coming in, we want close competition so that, a team, mid-grid team can win. So that, like we saw with last year at Monza, Pierre Gasly, his maiden win under maximum pressure. Okay, Hamilton was given a huge penalty, but how awesome was it to see him? Oh my God, we've just won the Italian Grand Prix. I still watch that and get goosebumps, So we want to be able to see those sort of moments where the underdog can win. And so having a cost cap, having a salary cap potentially coming in, new regulations that help cars get closer, I mean, that's what we want to aim towards. But it's going to create pain in the short term, and that's exactly what that is.
It's funny when you say that, Stewart, because one of the outlets that I've contributed to in the past, one of the most popular articles that we would publish every year is when the Major League Soccer Players Union would publish the player salary for the years, and of course the players and their families usually weren't too happy to see these numbers put out, but it was extremely popular. And as much as you say, like just the controversy that we've seen, and as Mark was mentioning just now about like Red Bull and the litigation off the track and all these sorts of things, people do love talking about. And very much when it comes to things like cost caps and salary caps and things like that, for some people it really gets under their skin. But it is fun to talk about these things and to speculate, especially in this sort of era, that potentially with the salary cap coming in, that who knows, maybe they have $50 million to pay their drivers on top of the $130 million salary cap that we're going to get to eventually. And, if you're a hardcore F1 nerd, which I'm sure goes for all three of us on the line right now, and for everybody watching and listening, it's just always something fun to talk about as well. But Stewart, as we kind of move through things here, we just want to get back to some of the action that we've seen this year. And one of them that you so rightly pointed out was Esteban Ocon winning in Hungary last week. And as painful as it was to watch that opening lap and all the thousands and potentially millions of dollars of damage being done to the the contenders in that opening lap, very much like Monza last year, what's a situation like that does is that even though the protagonists in the title battle might be eliminated from contention in that race, well, Max was, Lewis wasn't, obviously, it does give the opportunity for somebody else to stand up and make a name for themselves. And very much like you say, we get goosebumps watching Pierre win at Monza last year. I couldn't help but feel so happy to see Esteban win that race, and I think that was. It was I wouldn't say it was a long time coming, because it hasn't because he hasn't really had the car to do it, but I think it is for him is a real shot in the arm for his own career, because I think to date he has done very well in Formula One. Especially, this is a guy that lost out on a season being the reserve driver for Mercedes, and then especially for a young driver, losing a season in what is a very short career for most guys to begin with is very, very significant.
Absolutely, and I think he was signed on for that, or penned into that Renault drive before Daniel Ricciardo snapped it up. So to spend some time on the side, yeah, absolutely frustrating. But he did it as reserve of Mercedes, so they gave him as much time as they could, and he got to see the inner workings of a World Championship team. But yeah, you're right. Great to see him win, because he did it on merit under maximum pressure, like Pierre. In Monza, he did it under maximum pressure from Sebastian Vettel, and so he earned it. It was one on merit, even though the front runners were effectively ruled out. But he pushed himself to the limit. He had Fernando Alonso, obviously, as his rear gunner, holding back Hamilton for 11 laps to run down the clock. But yeah, I think it's fantastic. I mean, Ocon is a great guy. I think everyone in the paddock really, thinks he's a really kind-hearted person. He's decent to everyone around him, and he's worked hard for it. And I think he's been, he was GP3 champion. He came into the sport via, I think, DTM, and then he had a stand-in for Manor before joining Force India, and he's shown plenty of potential. And so, yeah, the win really sort of sweeps clean any sort of race rustiness. And it's also great to see a new winner in Formula One, which I think is something we all enjoy seeing.
Stuart, we're coming up on another break in about 3 or 4 minutes here. But before we do that, I mean, there's obviously been so many big, notable and standout moments this season. What have been some of the other things that have really caught your eye, apart from the big one at Silverstone with Max and Lewis at Cops Corner? What were some of the other things that have really stood out for you this season?
I mean, I think seeing George Russell collide with Valtteri Bottas at Imola was a shocking moment. And seeing him slap him on the helmet, I think the frustration that he's seeing, and I think he's one of the big stories coming up after the season break. I think he will be penciled into to Mercedes for sure. So seeing him he take his first points, obviously at Hungary for Williams. Yeah, I think Bottas, his underperformance has been quite shocking to see in terms of his downfall, and another winless, on track to being another winless season. But I think it's been the sort of season where we don't know what's going to happen when we go to a new track. Seeing in the Bahrain, the first race, Verstappen passing Hamilton off track and then having to give the place back. I think that's one of the most thrilling races we've seen so far. But there's intrigue in each and every round.
Muted myself. Usually I'm much more up to speed on these things, but yeah, no, that's some great points, and there is so many good races that are going to be coming up in the latter half of the season. I suppose that there could be some changes still depending on the pandemic and other parts of the world, but for one of the races that I'm really looking forward to, coming from a Dutch family myself, is Zandvoort, and they've been saying Jan Lammers, the race organizer, has been, and also former Formula One driver, has also been saying recently that they're expecting to pack the place at the beginning or just in a couple of weeks' time, which still seems very strange whenever I see it on the television. We haven't experienced that here on the west coast of Canada, but I'd like to look ahead to that in just a moment, and then still a bunch of other topics we'd like to touch on in the time that we have remaining. So we'll do that in just a moment. So guys, don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, everybody, welcome back to the show. Mark and Mark, joined again by Stewart Bell, F1 journalist based out of Melbourne, Australia. You can follow him at Stewart Bell F1, and of course that's Stewart Stewart, and Bell, just like it sounds, Bell. And Stewart, we were talking about some of the highs and lows of the moment this year. Mark, I know you had a couple of questions you wanted to throw out there as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're most excited about, and we don't think it's a perfect product yet, but we have to give credit to Liberty. We have to give credit to F1. They've absolutely rebuilt the financial infrastructure and structure that is F1, and they've got it in a really great, sustainable place for the future, which is exciting. But one of the other things that they seem really keen on doing is innovating with the on-track product, the Grand Prix weekend, redefining what that could look like. And one of the things that we were excited about experiencing earlier this season was sprint qualifying. And we'd been proposing for months, and I don't know if anyone's listening to us at Liberty in their offices, but we'd proposed this concept of, you know what, build four majors. And each of these majors, it could be a premier event in a key geographic location. The race organizers could pay extra money to have the benefit of kind of capturing this weekend and capturing this event. But we were big and keen on experiencing the sprint qualifying weekend. And we don't think it's perfect. We think it's a final product yet. But from your perspective, obviously having followed the sport and invested so much time in covering it and reporting on it, your perspective on the sprint qualifying weekend, was it a good first effort? Is it worth pursuing? Do you think it's going to get better? I think we would love to hear your thoughts on the format and where maybe it goes in the future.
I mean, I think, it was a fantastic thing to see. I mean, I come from seeing qualifying as being the fastest single lap on the weekend, and we certainly see that in qualifying on the Friday now. But I think it's exciting for the fact that it can change the layout, the horizon for the race. We saw Hamilton on pole, and then in the race, Verstappen got ahead of him. So in the sprint, I should say, Verstappen got ahead, and we saw Carlos Sainz, coming into contact and dropping down the field, and George Russell, I think we saw also come into contact, and look, it has an ability to and this is the whole aim of the thing, is to create some sort of uncertainty and a chaotic element to the weekend to spice up the races. So they're going to have the next two at Monza, and then at Sao Paulo if the Brazilian Grand Prix does go ahead. So I thought it was exciting. I think I'm looking forward to seeing the second iterations of it and how it can be improved. 13 laps is a very short amount of laps, but to be able to have it without pit stops, everyone's on generally on the same tires. Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting. It's something different. And I think Formula One needs a bit of chaos to shake things up rather than just having Mercedes and Red Bull at the front. There's a chance to inject some chaos.
Well, I'm glad that they put I don't want to say that they didn't put any thought into the previous attempt to try and spice up the qualifying, but it certainly has worked out, at least on the first attempt, much better than that rolling cutoff that they trialed several years ago. I always thought it was very strange that you had the qualifying going and you see some of the drivers walking around in the paddock out of their overalls with a hat on and a water bottle, when technically, they still could have been out there trying to qualify. So it is exciting. I'm glad to see that they are trying these different things, and some of the different ideas that Mark and I have tossed around is in light of the news that came out about a week ago, that the preference is to maybe have these sprint races at some of the more historical circuits, which I understand makes a lot of sense. But we thought that it would be better if you could break it up geographically. Have one in North America, one in Europe, one in Asia, the Middle East, however it works, and try and divide it up equally between geographically and also in the calendar as well. So without seeing the provisional calendar for 2022, and again, this is another fun thing to kind of speculate and talk about and see where it goes. But we were very pleased to see how it went, and I thought it really added something to the weekend. And it was very much for myself, and I'm pretty sure for many other people, it was appointment viewing, because instead of coming back to, I was, based where we are, it's not always easy to watch everything live because it's either in the middle of the night or very, very early in the morning. But this was very, very exciting. Really excited about it.
Yeah, I think it certainly creates action throughout the weekend. You've got, first practice and qualifying on Friday, second practice and the sprint on Saturday, and the race on Sunday. I think the only concern is if people start thinking the sprint is the race. If I really haven't heard that much feedback. Obviously, we're in lockdown, so I'm not speaking with a lot of people on the ground at the moment. But I think if people start thinking that the sprint is the race, if people start mixing that up, then that's the real concern. But to be honest with you, I think it's doing more benefit than more good than bad at the moment, and the element of chaos is there. And if it can shake up the order a little bit, great.
Absolutely. Now, Stewart, we've talked about some of the highs, some of the lows, some of the off-track stuff. And one of the things I want to ask, and this is one I always have a little bit of fun with, is when it comes to some of the drivers that maybe fly underneath the radar a little bit, the unsung heroes, if you will. Who's one of the drivers, or maybe you've got a couple of them, that maybe haven't seen the headlines, or maybe haven't made the news as often as they've deserved this year, because maybe being overshadowed between the battle that we've seen between Lewis and Max Verstappen all season long? I've got my pick. I'd be curious to hear yours.
Well, I think, for example, drivers like Sergio Perez, he's done a great job at Red Bull in terms of keeping the fire to Verstappen's feet, and being able, his win in Azerbaijan is exactly what he was employed to do, to win when Verstappen can't. Leclerc and Sainz have been very impressive at Ferrari. Leclerc only missed out on his maiden win in, where was it? At Silverstone, I think it was, where Hamilton nabbed. Was it Silverstone? I think it was Silverstone. Yeah, where Hamilton nabbed him 1.5 laps from home. So I think that they're doing a very impressive job. Carlos Sainz has come up very quickly to speed at Ferrari in relation to other drivers that have switched teams. So those are my real picks. Tsunoda, I think, has got the raw speed. He just needs a bit more experience, and I think he's an exciting talent that we're going to see. But I think, like Verstappen, he needs time to come into his own. He's been trailing Gasly on points. I think it's 50 to 18. They're on points, so quite a way behind. But if he can pick himself up and bring more points for AlphaTauri, then he can bring them forward and challenge challenge Alpine for 5th.
One thing I thought was very interesting, I don't know if you saw this about a week or two ago, there was an article in Forbes magazine that, we were talking earlier, or I made reference to the Major League Soccer salary figures, and they came out with some of the, or reportedly, salary figures for some of the Formula One drivers. I think it was the top highest, or the top 10 highest paid drivers, and they'd all be the ones that you would expect. And I thought it was very interesting. Now, if these, I don't know how accurate these numbers are, but being a publication like Forbes, I can't imagine that it would be, there would have to be some substance behind it. But I believe that the number that was put out there by them for Sergio Perez was an annual salary of $18 million. And I think the combined salary for Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz was $20 million for the pair of them. And I thought, if that is true, that is one hell of a good deal that Ferrari has managed to have those two drivers under contract. I mean, Charles is obviously a known quantity and very much looks like a potential world champion in the future. And Carlos Sainz was my pick for the unsung hero of 2021 so far. I think that, he's had some pretty good races this season, I thought, but the $20 million for the pair of them compared to multiple tens of millions for guys like Lewis and Max and Alonso, and which you would expect, I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, I think from what I understand, Perez's remuneration that includes a lot of huge bonuses. So I believe that his salary is actually much less than that, but he's obviously got very healthy bonuses, probably equal or greater to his salary. But yeah, Carlos Sainz and Leclerc, I can see fireworks between them, both of them. I mean, Leclerc's speed is breathtaking. He is on the same level, I believe, as Hamilton and Verstappen. And Sainz is a real juggernaut. He is exciting, and he will be the thorn in Leclerc's side. So when they do get a car capable of the World Championship, I can see them being maybe not as furious as Rosberg and Hamilton were, but not far off.
You know, Ferrari is certainly a fascinating case because they really did an effective job. You know, not just Mattia Binotto, but you know, all the Ferrari brass about a year ago, and they basically said, "Don't count on us to be a competitive team for at least you know, a couple of years." And I was thinking, well, maybe 2022, maybe 23, maybe it's going to take a couple of years. So I really lowered my expectations, and certainly they're not up there fighting with Red Bull and Mercedes each and every weekend, but we've certainly seen flashes of it this season. And what with the Binotto saying last week, or just even earlier this week, that they're going to introduce significant upgrades to the engine even later this season, has really had me rethink my position on where they are and what they've, where they're going, because I really wasn't expecting to see them do as well as they have. I mean, considering how dreadful they were 3/4 of basically 75% of last season. What's your opinion on what Ferrari's done so far this year?
I think they're trying to take smart steps. They sixth last year was a low point. I think it was the lowest since 1980 for them. So the only thing for Ferrari is to win races and to win championships. That is what they are there to do. And so it's been very demoralizing for them. Obviously, they were very innovative, I would say, with their power unit in previous years, and they weren't found of anything, but obviously they were penalised in some way with technical directives, and that saw their advantage completely slip because they built their car around a powerful engine, and that had drag implications. So to come back and come back to third, which is where they're equal third with McLaren, and they expect that they will retake third outright. So that's the best I think that they could hope for, to be behind Mercedes and Red Bull. Now all they have to do is close the gap, and we'll see what happens with these new regulations. It's a hugely clean sheet regulations for next year, so that gives them an opportunity to take a step change. And we heard from Jock Clear, their senior performance engineer on Beyond the Grid, saying he's very positive about where it's going. He's seeing all the right things, and obviously, who knows what's going to happen with their competition. But you can never count Ferrari out. They've got fantastic facilities. They're moving in the right direction. They're making smart decisions. They're trying to be smart with their trackside operations, so not making mistakes. So third is the best that they could expect this year, and if they can go on better next year, awesome.
Yeah, it certainly is a fun one to watch, and I can't believe they have gone so many years without having a world champion. It's especially when they were uber successful in the early 2000s with Michael Schumacher, and just the fact that they are Ferrari. But I want to move on now, because you had a chance to talk with Daniel Ricciardo just a couple of weeks ago at the British Grand Prix, and Danny is a guy that Mark and we've talked about a lot this year, and so we'd be very curious to find out what Daniel had to tell you, where he's at, where he's hoping to go, because I think it's fair to say that I would expect him to say that he would feel like he should be doing better so far at McLaren, but obviously he's had some issues extracting the full potential out of that car and driving it to the standards and to the level that he would expect of himself.
Absolutely. I think I spoke to him at Silverstone, and he was, he loves McLaren. He loves the facilities. He loves the team. He feels like his relationships are gelling in there. He feels like he's got his feet under the table, but the car does not suit his natural style. We've heard about him talking about the braking. I think he's certainly made strides on his braking. That's his biggest strength is his braking. But the car doesn't suit his natural style, and he's fighting it around the lap. And that's not what you want as a Grand Prix driver. You want to feel like the car is an extension of you. And that's where you get the best results, is being at one with the car, taking your car to the limit, So, and he can't do that. And I think that was very frustrating for him. We spoke at length about it and what it is. And, really, I think for the first part of the season, he was trying to bring the car to him. I mean, yeah, he was trying to bring the car to him in terms of, changing things, making different setups and whatnot, and trying to, tweak things around his own style. But he now realizes he can't do that. He's certainly still asking the team for developments about taking things back to his natural style. But I think, like any Grand Prix driver who's driving a car that doesn't suit him, you have to adapt, because you're not always going to be able to drive a car that suits your natural style. So I think that's been a significant challenge. So he's enjoying his time at McLaren. There's no doubt about that. He feels, he got to drive Senna's McLaren at Goodwood, and that was a real special moment for him. He would sort of put himself in the car and imagined what Senna was experiencing when he was in the car. But I think, it's been difficult, but I think he feels positive about coming out of this funk and this ability to not get it on top of the car.
Stewart, Danny, he's not one of the youngest drivers on the grid, and I mean, he's by no means, past it or over the hill, but you have to think that maybe in the back of his mind, maybe just the clock is ticking a little bit. Do you get any sense when talking to him that there's maybe a bit of urgency at where he's at mentally in his career?
Yes. I mean, I think that's why he jumped to McLaren. He was frustrated at Renault. I think he got 2 podiums for them at Renault in the last year, and that was a really great way for him to send off his time at Renault. But the clock is ticking down, and he realizes he needs to see the progress. And he made that decision even before the season had started for him at Renault. So that was quite a gamble. But McLaren are the form team. McLaren are the form mid-grid team. They're on an upward trajectory. They have been for a number of years. And like Lando Norris, who I spoke with, I think it was in Austria, he sees this as, that's why he signed on. They both believe that McLaren will give them a proper opportunity to move forward. And to be honest with you, there's not the chance to go to Mercedes. There's not the chance to go to Ferrari. So, and I'm sure Dan doesn't want to go back to Red Bull, so McLaren is the place to be. And if they can pull out a competitive car next year, which they well can do with a Mercedes engine, then chapeau to him.
Yeah, absolutely. When you talked about that real emotion watching Gasly win at Monza last year, I thought one of the great moments that was really captured nicely in Drive to Survive Season 3 was Lando in Austria last year when he got that podium, even though Lewis had that 5-second penalty and that real push in the last several laps to get within that 5-second buffer, that 5-second gap that he needed to take that place from Lewis, and his emotion afterwards. We can hear it over the race radio when you see the camera pictures. I couldn't help but choking up a little bit myself watching it, because I found that a very, very real moment. And I think that it's a great team for both of them. I mean, look, obviously this is a team that's gone from the loftiest of the pinnacle of Formula One, and then has also hit rock bottom. And to come back that the way that they have over a fairly short amount of time to compare to where they were 4, 5, 6 years ago, I think is incredible. I really look forward to seeing where both of these guys go from here. But as we're drawing to a close here, Stu and Mark, before we go, I just wanted to, this is one email we had from Carlos Hernandez, one of our listeners in Houston, Texas, and I wanted to read this one out. I did a bit of research for this one, and I'll just read it for you. And it's kind of cool. So Carlos has to say, "Hello, Mark and Mark. I listened to your recent podcast, and the email that you shared from Bitter Brad in Pittsburgh struck home with me a little bit. I'm from a blue collar background, and while it doesn't preclude me from entirely supporting silver spoon athletes such as Lance Stroll, I often find myself cheering for the athletes that hail from more humble circumstances, such as Esteban Ocon. I recently listened to a podcast in which I learned that Valtteri Bottas served a short compulsory stint in the Finnish military. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, so this fact intrigued me. Do you know of any other past or present F1 drivers that are also veterans of their respective militaries? So first of all, Carlos, thank you for your service, and for all the other vets out there, and especially those of you in the community that are on active service and put yourselves in harm's way for our benefit. I did look into this one, and there is a bit of a common thread here. So other Formula One drivers, past and present, that have served in the military include two former world champions. Both of them are Finnish, and neither of them are Mika Hakkinen. So Kimi Räikkönen served a compulsory stint in the Finnish army, as did 1982 world champion Keke Rosberg. And the very first world champion, Nino Farina, who won in 1950, was a cavalry officer in Italy in the 1930s, I believe it was. Anyways, Carlos goes on to say, interesting details such as this provide depth to athletes as human beings and deepen my engagement with the sport. Do you happen to know of any other interesting personal details regarding F1 drivers or other significant F1 personnel? So, Stu, I'm going to throw that one to you. Do you know of anybody that has an interesting side story? Because as we know, like a lot of these guys, I mean, this is basically all they've done from karting as a kid, and they've gone up through the different formulas. I mean, we talked not so long ago about Sergio Perez said he basically gave up his childhood to move from Mexico to go to Germany to focus on his racing career, and everything he gave up on a personal side. So any other stories like that you know of?
Well, I believe that Nikita Mazepin also is trying to negotiate his Russian service
Yes.
over the military. And as I said, as you said, thank you for everyone who serves in the military to keep all of us safe wherever you are. Thank you very much for that. I know that, example, Sebastian Vettel loves old antique motorcycles that he does up. Collects British records and loves British humor. I mean, Daniel Ricciardo has a brewery. He also loves fashion. In terms of real interest, I mean, it is difficult to find them. When I do a lot of lifestyle interviews with drivers and try to delve into what they're interested in, but it is very difficult to pick them up on those sort of things, because they either train a lot or they're relaxing at home. I mean, if you look at Mick Schumacher, I mean, he goes and hangs out with his dog and goes for walks, and that's pretty much it. But I mean, Lando Norris, obviously, with his gaming, he loves to stream on Twitch. He plays drums. He's quite an interesting guy. I think that's why a lot of people identify with him, because he likes to get online. I think a lot of the drivers are gamers. Pierre Gasly, Call of Duty, as well as Lando Norris. I think even Lewis Hamilton plays Call of Duty as well. So,
I play Call of Duty. Maybe I can get in some online game with wishful thinking.
They're all very focused, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, because I think that we have a lot of preconceived notions about like these Formula One drivers, and this. I mean, they obviously live very different lifestyles than we do, but it sometimes is interesting. Professional athletes of any stripe, some of them, they lead very normal and kind of very different lifestyles than what we perceive them do. With all the exposure and the obviously the big salaries that they earn. Mark, did you want to throw something in there as well?
Only, and this just ties back to something that you and I have talked about so much, which is prior to Drive to Survive, especially under the Bernie Eccleston era, we had so little line of sight and visibility into the personality and the personal lives of these drivers. And when Liberty came in, they opened up social media. We got a kind of a sliver, a sneak peek, but Drive to Survive created a relationship between the audience and the drivers. And when we talk to the Gen DTS audience, for so many of them, the reason they're attracted to and so incented to watch the Grand Prix race weekends is because I know Daniel, I know Lando, I know Lewis. I've never met them, but I know enough about their personal life that I've created an attachment, a bond, and that's really fueling so much of the interest. So when we talk to our audience now, it's interesting. We did a survey before the beginning of the season, and we surveyed our thousands of listeners, most of whom are American, but we surveyed them and like, who's your favorite driver? And obviously Max was popular, and and Lewis was popular. Daniel Ricciardo is hugely popular in the US, especially in Texas and on the West Coast. But we did the survey again recently, and now it's Lando. But again, so much of it goes back to, what is it that you like about the, well, you know, I like his racecraft and he's really racy, but did you see this thing he did off the track? And did you see this Twitch video that they built relationships in a new way? So again, going back to DTS, and it seems like everything with us goes back to DTS, Mark, but it's really created a bond between the audience, especially this new activated fan base, and the drivers. And that's fueling the interest in the actual race weekends, which is just fantastic to see.
It's good because you want to, you know, I want to see the interest that the drivers have. You know, I mean, it's, you know, Romain Grosjean likes to cook, you know, and he put out a cookbook with his wife, you know. So, but I think, you know, Lando is so popular because he's so down to earth and you can joke with him. And I think when you interview a lot of elite sports people, they're a lot of them are quite socially maladjusted, you know.
Yeah.
And because that's all they know is their craft. They're 150% dedicated to that. And so when you speak with someone who is normal, I mean, what is normal? But, you know, when someone is down to earth and relaxed, it just, you can connect with them. And I think that's, you know, it's the guys like, you know, Lando and Dan, you know, and George and Esteban Ocon, who you can talk with, and they're happy to be open about themselves. I think that's what all of us want to do, is connect with them and then see them do well on track, you know.
Yeah, it is very true, and I've learned that myself over the years, that sometimes, you know, when and it all comes down to individual people and how they are, and some athletes doing the media thing is something they don't like. It's just part of the job. It's just go in, answer the questions as few words as humanly possible, and then move on. But the ones that have always stood out for me are the ones where, you know, there is like a genuine back and forth. You know, there's more of a conversation rather than me pitching questions and just getting, you know, an answer back. And I think that's why, you know, especially watching like Lando, watching Danny, and guys like that, you know, I appreciate them more because, you know, having interacted with many professional athletes, that there seems more genuineness there when I see them talking in the media. And certainly, you know, having the sense of humor that the both of them have is really quite fun to see as well. As long as they don't you know, they don't force them to rap again like McLaren did at the car launch this year. Although I thought it was rather a funny moment, musical skills you know, notwithstanding. Although I think Lando did get a chance to get on the drums, or was it Daniel? I can't remember. I think they both got a chance to do something.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You know, I mean, I don't want to hold you guys up, but I think you know, for the media, when we get time with a driver, it's 10 minutes. I mean, that is it. And I might be serving 4 publications with the one interview. So I've got to ask very pointed questions. You know, I might have 10 questions to throw at them, and each of them serves a purpose in terms of finding out what they're doing about their season, about their lifestyle, about travel, or what have you. So, you know, we're doing the media is trying to do their best in I mean, there's obviously different qualities of journalists out there, but I think, you know, the public doesn't generally see how tough it is to you know, get everything you need to say in 10 minutes. So it is great when you do have someone who is very open and chatty, and you can open it up that little bit more.
I always found it also a little bit intimidating when you're trying to do an interview with someone and they send one of their media people along as well, and they're standing right beside them with a little you know, recorder, getting something as well. And sometimes I always feel like, you know, to try to be professional and, you know, about it as well, and not try and be put off. But I do, you know, I have to admit that personally, I do find that a little bit off-putting sometimes. Not that I ask, you know, really offside questions or try to get a controversial comment, but still sometimes, you know, it feels like, you know, like you see a policeman parked on the side of the road. He may or may not have his radar gun out, but it makes me feel like I should be behaving myself a little bit more, if I could put it that way.
I've got a funny story. I was doing an interview with Takuma Sato years ago.
Oh, right, yeah.
And his press officer was hanging just in the background, not too close, and he was talking about a test day. And just, you know, I think he was at Super Aguri, so he's saying, oh, something about the test, it was great, or went to Paul Ricard or what have you. Anyway, we finish up the interview, and I'm walking out, and the press officer says that test was actually not on August 25th, it was August 24th. You were over there, like, how did you, so obviously she was trying to be as non-intrusive as possible. Shows the professionalism of the PR, but it's incredible sometimes that you're bowled over by their, it's good that she picked that up because I can be accurate with my reporting.
Yeah, discreetly, listening, but not really showing it too much. That's a great story. All right, well, Stewart, that's all we've got time for tonight. Before we let you go, please remind everybody where they can find you online and the best way to follow you on social media.
It's just Stewart Bell F1 on Instagram and Twitter, and follow the Inside Line on social media. I produce that weekly show. It goes out on Rev TV in Canada. And other stations throughout the world. But again, really appreciate your support, guys, and everyone watching.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Stewart. And thank you all, one and all, for listening and downloading the show tonight. We will be back. There won't be any show on Monday this week. We're just doing the weekly show for now until the season picks back up in a couple of weeks. And as always, best way is to follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod, and make sure you tune in on Thursday nights for the Spaces chat, which Mr. Mark Hamilton always does such a great job hosting. And of course, if you want to send us an email, you can do that as well at scuderiaf1pod@gmail.com. That's it. That's a wrap. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye for now.